Governor Ryan first put the moratorium in place after he released the 13th death row inmate. Eventually did lead to Governor Quinn, 10 years later, signing a bill to abolish.
George Ryan is an incredibly pivotal figure. But for George Ryan, I don't know if any of this would ever happen, because he really did change the entire dynamic, I think, not here in the state, just not here in the state, but in the entire world.
I, of course, spent almost 18 years in prison, 12 on death row for a crime I didn't commit. And I felt like those years that I fought for my freedom, exactly how many other Randy Steidles is there in the country and in this state? And come to find out, there was actually 19 other men that I was on death row with that were actually innocent. Every judge that sat in on my case over the years knew the flaws and deficiencies of the case, but refused to act. It's outrageous. And they could have very well have executed me had they not put a moratorium in place. But I was very fortunate with Judge McCuskey, granted every issue in my federal habeas corpus petition. If it hadn't been for that, I'd be still doing life without parole or be dead today. And it's just sad that you have to go to federal court to get any kind of justice. That's the kind of system Illinois has. They got tunnel vision, they got blind faith in a system because they're the judge and the jury's never wrong. What their motive was for putting me there is 6 weeks before Dyke and Karen Rose were viciously murdered, my co-defendant and myself reported this prosecutor and her employer to the FBI for money laundering and protecting drug distribution. And here 25 years later, in a civil deposition in my civil case, this prosecutor admitted to protecting drug distribution and doing drugs himself as a prosecutor. That was his motive. He wanted to silence me and my co-defendant. All I got is a felony record, unjust felony record, that this governor, along with the last two, refuses to act because it's too politically sensitive.
There were things that happened in Randy's, case that just didn't appear to be kosher. I stood next to him when he lobbied members, which was an interesting thing for me to listen to what he had to say to them, because he's personally a very compelling witness, okay. Whereas I'm, arguing the case like a lawyer on behalf of my association. I spent a lot of time educating myself on it, and I didn't really know much about it until that time, and I'd come to the conclusion personally that it was an issue that I believed in. I adopted the Blackmun view, because you recall Harry Blackmun was a Supreme Court justice that for years had voted to uphold the death penalty and then just threw his arms up and said, we just can't do this. We just can't do it right.
The monotony of being locked up on death row, which is a prison within a prison, the monotony is maddening if you don't keep your mind and your body occupied. What could I have done to have benefited myself now had I had the opportunity rather than to just vegetate and try to keep from going insane? And that's not right. It's deliberate indifference is what Department of Corrections is. They think I was sentenced to the penitentiary for punishment, not as punishment. They get those confused. If you don't have a family or friends or a network of people to help you get reestablished, a lot of guys end up right back into prison.
I really was interested in getting to know people who had committed these, or alleged to commit these crimes, to know them as people. And I remember hearing Sister Helen Prejean years ago say that, no one is the worst thing that they've ever done. That we're all people. We all do bad things. Of course, some of the crimes committed by these men are just horrendous, and but often it's like a one-time thing, maybe a crime of passion, maybe under the influence of drugs, and so it's more, they are more than that. it might be 2 or 3 months in between visits, and they would remember what we had talked about the time before. It really was amazing that they had that little else going on in their lives, that they could remember just what you talked about. I also know where they are, so that I do intend to write at least once to say, you know, we haven't forgotten you.
People make mistakes, and that is what people have to realize, is take the blinders off. Don't believe everything you hear or read in the newspaper when it comes to somebody being charged with an horrendous crime. And because what you see in a courtroom, what the jury is listening to, it's already been played out behind closed doors in the judges' chambers. You just walk out there and put on the play. To me, educating people about it is a healing process. It's a healing process, but it's painful on the other hand too. I don't believe anybody has the right, other than 2 reasons, to take anybody's life. One is self-defense of me or my family, and 2, in war. That's the only 2 reasons. The state, the government, has no business taking somebody's life when we all know how corrupt our federal government is and how corrupt the state of Illinois is. I just want to commend the General Assembly of the state of Illinois and all the many, many hard-working people that put a lot of time and effort in this abolition movement. I was just a spoke in the wheel, and I was very honored to be able to help see this movement accomplished in Illinois, and we no longer have this barbaric system on the books.
I just smelled that we could do it, and that's just intuition. That isn't any kind of sitting down and mapping out votes and doing a roll call. It just seemed like its time had come in this state.
Once you get this down to a handful of states, 5 or 6 or 7, that actually carry out executions, I believe the United States Supreme Court's going to step in and say, wait a minute, we can't have 5 or 6 states killing people for first-degree murder when other states know there's an alternative in place, and it's life without parole, and you don't risk executing an innocent person.
I have met a woman whose sister was murdered, and this woman was working very hard for abolition of the death penalty. She didn't believe in the death penalty, but she still wants life without parole for the person who killed her sister. She wanted to honor her sister's forgiving of her killer, but she still did not want him ever to get out of prison.
Generally, the death penalty is the support for it is a mile wide and an inch thick, because people don't understand that it's cheaper to give somebody life without parole than it is to try to execute.
One of the things they kept arguing was that all the money we'd spent, all the reforms that had been done by the government, by the legislature and the Supreme Court, all those reforms, in their view, virtually ensured that no one innocent would ever be convicted and put to death. They also argued that some of these guys were so bad that you needed to, kill them to be safe. Thoreau does a pretty good job of debunking that by taking you through TAMS and some of the maximum security places, and says, if anyone can, harm somebody in here when you're locked down 23 hours a day, that would be hard to do.
Look at the state of Texas, which I believe still has the most people on death row. If they keep putting people on death row, it means that crimes are still being committed, so it's not a deterrent. I remember years ago as a teacher hearing that hitting a child for hitting somebody else doesn't make sense. You don't say, it's wrong to hit, so I'm hitting you. So if it's wrong to kill, why would we kill the person? I mean, they certainly need to be punished. I mean, but killing is not going to keep somebody else from killing.
I think it was Steve Mills wrote a really good article after the bill was signed by Governor Quinn, and he said the day the death penalty in this state died was when George Ryan watched Anthony Porter walk out of prison, and that man had been less than 48 hours from being, executed. And he turned to his wife, according to the article, and said, how the hell does this happen? And he said at that moment the death penalty was done.